Charlie!
What have you done?
Well, I was in the editing room just a few minutes ago, and, well, you know that stuff you were working on for part 2? I screwed it up, and also, we have a meeting with someone. Who is that? Tell me, who is it? Well, you're not gonna like it. Just tell me already. Well, it's...
2010. Slifer the Sky. Oh, come on, all God cards are bad.
Oh my freaking God. They've risen from the dead.
Damn it!
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Saturday Nostalgia Zone. Today, this is part 2 of what happened to 4Kids Entertainment. Pretty much talking about a few shows that they did before, and, well, how they fell off from the face of the earth. Where nobody ever hears from them again, and is probably wondering, whatever happened to these guys? Well, last time we covered Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters, Mew Mew Power, and then after that, or at least before those two, we covered Pokemon. So today we're going to cover the 2003 TMNT, Shaman King, which was an anime, or at least a underrated and hidden gem anime created back in 2001, and was in the same regards to both Yu-Gi-Oh! And Dragon Ball Z. And then the last one is also one of my favorite TV shows, but also a friend of mine's favorite TV shows of all time as well. And also, he was, I asked him if he wanted me to do this one as well, and he said that would be awesome if I did. And that would be Sonic X. Okay, so first let's talk about the 2003 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So back in 2003, well, after the original 80s TMNT TV series back in the 1980s and ended in 1992, then later on, well, I mean, after every other TMNT series like Next Mutation and movies, and then their crossover with the Power Rangers for whatever reason. Then came later on, 4Kids Entertainment was doing very well with both their licenses on Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! So then they were deciding, hey, why don't we get some more licenses? And those licenses happened to be Shaman King, Dinosaur King, TMNT, which is the one we're doing right now, Sonic, mainly Sonic X. I believe one of them was called Kunikuman as its original Japanese, but its English version is known as Ultimate Muscle. And a bunch of other ones. Some of them I can't remember. Oh, crap. Yep, Charlie's right. Forgot to mention One Piece. Yeah, they're One Piece now. let's just move on from that part. Anyway, so then they picked up the TMNT series, and well, this series had the same name as every other TMNT show. But this series actually introduced me to TMNT. While the original cartoon was more goofy and funny, but probably could be dark at times, or at least I think it could have been. Or at least random moments with like a elderly woman pulling out a gun on the TMNT. But the 2003 series actually was more similar to the original comic books for TMNT, where they were a lot darker. Like for one example, in the 2003 series, there was an episode where Donatello ended up being well, actually all the turtles ended up traveling to different dimensions and different eras of time. But Donatello's is actually the darkest out of the four. What Donatello ended up to was a post-apocalyptic future where pretty much the entire city was taken over. And well, some of his friends are gone. Michelangelo, the personality he used to have where he was pretty much the wild one and the one that usually is the wisecracker of the group, kind of like Spider-Man and Deadpool. Most of that was stripped away from him because during that story they pretty much gone through pretty much some strange and terrible crap, like all the turtles did when Donnie left. And Donnie was said to be the one that kept the group together, but when he disappeared, they all just ended up disbanding, but also getting hurt and, well, just losing themselves. Not to mention that some of their friends actually did die. Master Splinter actually was one of the characters that actually ended up being killed off during this. Another one is said to be Casey Jones as well. And this series also took its own liberties for what it wanted to do. One of the few changes that this series made was that, for one example, the Shredder was a freaking Utron. So that means he was an alien in this series, which no other TMNT actually ever did that before. As far as I'm concerned, none of them before this one ever did. Or after. They have done the Super Shredder thing again. Maybe not in this, but in a different series. From what I remember, this series is pretty much my introduction to the TMNT, which also became one of my favorite series. Like, I'd always watch it on Saturday mornings on the CW 4Kids. Well, when that was still a thing, before 4Kids gone down. Anyway, the other thing about this series is, well, you remember that crossover with the 80s Turtles and the 2012 TMNT? If any of you remember that, the 2003 series also had a crossover in 2009. Like, there was a sort of TV movie known as Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Turtles Forever, which had the 2003 Turtles meet up with the 1980s Turtles, where each of them would go into each other's worlds. And another version of the Turtles that would actually appear in this movie was actually the versions of the Turtles from the comic books, like the original black and white ones anyway, the ones where the storylines are a bit darker, they're all wearing the exact same headbands, and yeah, pretty much that one. That's pretty much the one that they used, except in that show they call them Turtles Prime, or at least Prime Turtles, which would pretty much mean they're the original Turtles, which obviously they technically are, since the TMNT originated as comic book characters, and that's who well, how they started off as a more dark and gritty comic book series until later on. And this series also had a few other like spin-offs or at least spin-off seasons where they didn't make sense. Some of them did make sense and others didn't. Because after the main part of the series, then it got to one of the parts of the series that's the most hated in TMNT. And that, of course, is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Fast Forward. I never hated this series, but this TMNT is in the same universe as the 2003 series, but the only difference is that in one episode, or at least the beginning, the Turtles end up getting sucked into a future version of New York City, and then from what I remember, it seems that they meet the nephew of April O'Neil and Casey Jones in the future. There is another character in there that actually, well, the Turtles actually knew him before Fast Forward, but they have no memory of him. And that is actually the robot that the character I was just talking about has, which the way the Turtles used to know him was apparently that he was actually a toy. He used to be a toy that they owned when they were younger, at least, who returned with them in the final parts of TMNT 2003, Back to the Sewers. And Back to the Sewers starts off with the Turtles returning back to the present day New York, but also when they were getting back to New York, Master Splinter got stuck into cyberspace, and they had to try to get him back out. And during that series, they also kind of went back into cyberspace and also had sort of like a cool, like Tron-esque type of uniforms and powers. And the way this series ended, it ended with the Turtles seeing April O'Neil and Casey Jones get married, but a lot of characters that the Turtles have met up with are there too. For one example, trying to remember what Leatherhead was there too. The robot was, I believe Splinter was too, but there were a bunch of characters there, but I don't remember exactly how many were there. Or at least, that was the ending until, like I just said, Turtles Forever. Now let's get to Shaman King. Shaman King was started out as a Japanese manga created in 1998 by Hiroyuki Take, and it was published in Shueisha's weekly Shonen Jump magazine. The protagonist of the series is known as Yo Asakura, who is a boy that's trying to become a being known as the Shaman King. The Shaman King, of course, is pretty much this world's version of God, or at least a sort of way like God. Basically, it's the person who brings balance to the entire world, in their own image at least. I don't remember Yo's reason for it, but there were other characters who also wanted to become Shaman King, but from what I remember, Yo didn't have much of a reason. In fact, originally he didn't even want to be Shaman King. He actually wanted to be a rock star, which either that or just a musician, which I guess he did get that dream since his voice is actually in the intro for the series. And then there's some other characters in the show, such as Tao Lin. Lin is pretty much Shaman King's version of Vegeta and Kaiba. Basically, he's the person who is Yo's rival and always wants to get stronger than him and defeat him, but the protagonist is always one step ahead of him. Then there's also his friend known as Trey Racer, who, or Horo Horo as he's known as in the original Japanese, which his reason for becoming Shaman King is to save the Minusians, and then there's the character of Hayo Asakura, which in the English dub he's known as Zeke. Except he's actually the main antagonist of the series, and his reasons for becoming Shaman King is the fact that he wants to pretty much end all humanity on Earth, and then make it so that only animals and everything else will be able to live together, including shamans, even though shamans are technically humans themselves. And so is Zeke. But then Zeke says that once he becomes Shaman King, his human side will no longer exist, and then he'll become one with the universe. Now this doesn't actually happen, which if you watch the show or find a way to, then you'll know that this never does happen. At least not in the anime, it doesn't. It happens in the manga, but I'll get to the manga's ending after I talk about the show's ending. But this character also has a giant spirit known as the Spirit of Fire. His guardian ghost is pretty much the one who brings all destruction. I'm sorry that I didn't mention that, and I forgot to mention Yo's guardian ghost, but Yo's guardian ghost is also a spirit known as the Midamaru, who is a 600-year-old samurai who pretty much got framed for a crime he never committed, which was also a crime for killing off his best friend, which is only, or at least only seen in episode 2 and the final episodes of the show. Now, then there's also the case where Zeke is also said to be Yo's twin brother, but also is said to be his 1,000-year-old ancestor. Now, that does sound weird when you think about it, but apparently it's almost like Yami Yugi, where it's said to be that Yugi is the reincarnation of Yami, but Yami also came back in the Millennium Puzzle and came back to Earth out of the Millennium Puzzle for about after 3,000 or 5,000 years. Now basically, you want to know how this show ends? Well, other than the fact that this show has some dark stuff, like one of the main characters, Morty, he getting stuck to a cross, which Morty is also the character you see in episode 1, narrating the entire series, and becomes Yo's best friend after Yo saves him from Rio, which is the leader of a biker gang in the show, or at least was until later. And then he becomes a shaman himself. But after that, apparently, the way the show ends is that Yo pretty much is about to be burned alive by Zeke's Spirit of Fire until somehow the energy from all of his friends and everyone else who had faith in him create images of birds who happen to be flying to a tree. And then, once all of them come to this tree, then happens to come a image of Yo's face, and then Yo happens to fuse with a Midamaru and becomes even more powerful than Zeke. And Zeke's Spirit of Fire, before that episode, in the previous episode, Zeke's Spirit of Fire rips into the heart of the King of Spirits and takes him by force. And then the Spirit of Fire not only changes color, but he also becomes stronger and becomes about 10 times bigger than he was before. Yeah, just imagine what that would look like. Not too well. In fact, I'm pretty sure whoever would be near it will probably get stomped in about a millisecond. Anyway, so Yo gains all this power, and somehow it's like a spirit bomb from Dragon Ball Z. He then fights Zeke and apparently defeats Zeke in one blow. And this part of the episode is only about 7 minutes. Like 5 to 7 minutes. And somehow this is not the entire episode, and it wasn't even, or at least not the entire part of the episode, and it's not even satisfying either because they barely really fought and it was only about 5 minutes. Which he explodes, and then where the tournament would take place, the Shaman tournament, where everybody would compete to become Shaman King, known as Dobie Village, it would explode. Well, no, not explode, but would disappear after the Spirit of Fire and Zeke exploded. Which then after, everybody lives their normal lives and are just waiting for the tournament to be reopened. Which it does get reopened, but at the very end of the final episode. The final episode is left open-ended. It's left open-ended and nobody even knows what happens after. Like, does anyone win, or who becomes Shaman King? Is it Yo? Is it Trey? Is it Len? Lyserg? Or anyone else? I didn't mention Lyserg, but okay, let me mention Lyserg now. Lyserg was a character who wanted revenge on Zeke for killing his parents when he was a child, or at least about 6 years old. And then after, he wanted revenge, but then when he first met Yo, he thought Yo was Zeke, and then later on wanted Yo on his side. And then after an episode with a vampire that apparently took over Lyserg's body, but then also had Yo doing it, he then leaves the team and joins a group of mercenaries, or at least seems like a group of mercenaries known as the X-Laws. The X-Laws happen to be the ones who want to completely murder Zeke and are also against Yo until the final episode. Now, the manga's ending is actually different. The way the manga ends is that Zeke actually wins and becomes Shaman King. Everybody loses and actually decides to just give up and let him win because apparently he's too powerful for them. Especially since a power that he has, that all characters have in the show, or at least all the shamans, that allow them to use spirit control and spirit unity, known as Furyoku. He happens to have an endless supply of it. In both the anime and the manga, he has so much that he's probably never gonna run out anytime soon. And I never liked this ending. I didn't like either endings that much. Neither of the endings were really that good, to me anyway. The manga was great, the anime was also but it could have been better. And the anime ended, after it ended in 2002, the manga would end about 2 years after, or at least get cancelled, but then Hiroyuki Take would come back to the series and work on it for about 5 years later in 2009. But then Shueisha would also lose the rights to the series and it would no longer be part of Shonen Jump and instead be part of Kodansha's weekly shonen magazine as well, or at least just a manga for them. So yeah, that's Shaman King. It did become one of my favorite animes after I first saw it, but unfortunately the ending is not too great. But the series, I think it deserves a watch, and the manga also deserves a read. Now, let's talk about one more show that I think you all might have memories of. Either fond memories or just moderate memories, but it's a show that I like, and also a friend of mine that some of you might know as Elect Prince also has, which he also requested this series, and that would be, of course, Sonic X. Alright, so Sonic X was a anime series created in 2003 based on the Blue Blur himself, Sonic the Hedgehog, which is Sega's mascot character. And this series pretty much takes inspiration from the Dreamcast Sonic games, mainly Sonic Adventure 1 and 2. And the series is animated by a company known as TMS, which is also the same company that animated the the Spider-Man the animated series from the 1990s on Fox Kids. Funny enough, both of these shows were also on Saturday morning blocks that were owned by Fox. Fox Kids and the Fox Box. And I guess 4Kids TV if you want to count that too. Anyway, the story of the show is that Sonic and his friends after Sonic starts fighting Dr. Eggman, he then somehow gets, sucked into a different world, or at least a portal takes him to a different world, which happens to be ours, and he happens to be saved by a boy named Chris Thorndike, which this character actually is a more of the hated characters in recent Sonic history. Well, not recent, because this came out 2003, we're at 2019. Anyway, this character is one that's remembered for pretty much the one character that took up most of the screen time. I never had a problem with Chris, to be honest, I never did. I actually liked the character, but most of the series did take place on Earth, or at least Chris's Earth, not Sonic's. And what they had to do was that they all had to collect the Chaos Emeralds to pretty much make it so that they can get back to Sonic's world. Like that Sonic and his friends could all go back to their own worlds rather than stay on Earth forever. Unfortunately, it actually takes a while, and the characters they have to fight, one of them is Shadow the Hedgehog. I don't know what came up with me. Sorry that I made that mistake. Anyway, Shadow the Hedgehog I meant to say, which literally looks like a black and red version of Sonic, but on roller skates. At least it looks like they are. And he's also not as fast as Sonic either. And this character's first appearance was actually in the Sonic video game known as Sonic Adventure 2. And then later on, he would appear in other Sonic games, including some of the crossover ones with their rival/friend known as Mario. But enough of him. Then there's also a monster that was in the original Sonic Adventure known as Chaos. And then there's also the Metarex, which is in the final season. I'll get more to them after. So, in fact, you know how Sonic is more of like a smart aleck? He's also, it doesn't act very serious a lot, and also is a kind of snarky as well, but also knows how to have fun. The version of him in Sonic X apparently seems more like he's serious all the time. The first time I watched the show, I never actually noticed how serious he was. But now looking back at that, and then looking at how he acts in the games, he acts almost nothing like how Sonic is supposed to, because he always has this serious look, especially when he's always on a roof, looking in the sky and thinking of something. Either that or asleep and thinking of something as well. Well, something other than chili dogs and his friends. And then there's also an episode that also is before the next season, which in Japan this was technically the series finale, but in America and everywhere else it wasn't, and that is the fact that Chris is trying to prevent Sonic from going back to his world. Everyone else does everyone else goes back, but Chris prevent Sonic from doing it because he had such a fun time with Sonic being around, and he never wanted him to leave. Which Sonic also says that he'll stay if Chris wants him to, but Chris also knows that Sonic can't stay. He knows he can't stay, he has to go back to his own world. Which Amy, Knuckles, Rouge, and everyone else, including Eggman, gone back to their own world. So then later, Chris would then actually make the right decision and actually let Sonic go back to his own world. And then there's also one season that I also remember, and my brother also remembers too, which is, of course, the Metarex Saga. Now, some of you might not have known, but let me give you some information about the Metarex Saga. So the Metarex Saga actually never aired in Japan. Like, for many in Japan, the previous episode that I just mentioned was the end of the series. That was until, or at least, but everywhere else, 4Kids was able to somehow get their hands on the Metarex Saga, and it's kind of like both with Yu-Gi-Oh! and also Bakugan, because Yu-Gi-Oh! Had one part of Season 5 that never aired in Japan, but did air in America when the series was about to end, and that was Yu-Gi-Oh! Capsule Monsters, which was a sort of almost like the Dungeon Dice Monsters thing, where it was like a spin-off of the original card game, but it was turned into more of a board game, but neither of them really succeeded outside of the card game. Just like how the video games for Yu-Gi-Oh! Don't really succeed either. Most of them don't. Anyway, what's up? What else? Oh yeah, and also the same thing, Sonic X and Bakugan were both shows that were considered failures in their country of origin, which is Japan. And so then after, the show would get cancelled in Japan, and one of the seasons that was already finished there never released, and it only released in America and Canada and everywhere else that Sonic X would air on except for Japan. Just like the same with Bakugan, where its final season, New Vestroia, would air on Cartoon Network and I believe Teletoon in Canada, but would never air in Japan because the show was considered pretty much a failure and nobody actually cared about them. Like, unfortunately, Sonic X wasn't really that popular in Japan, and also some actually kind of considered it boring. Like, 4Kids technically were the ones that actually made the show slightly better. Even if they censored a lot of stuff, like removing writing and removing like specific objects with other ones, like Chris's father holding a bottle of wine, and then later that bottle of wine becomes, I believe, a skateboard for whatever reason. He's holding one. I forgot what it was, but it was something else that was censored too. Well, actually, no, a bunch of other Japanese references were also censored, and then just completely Americanized the show. But I can't remember what other things that they did change. At least not many of them. And in the Metarex Saga, a bunch of robots known as the Metarex would pretty much attack Sonic and his friends. Then later, they pretty much would go into a space, kind of like a space journey, which that's pretty much Sonic's Star Wars, if you could say. And they meet up with a character known as Cosmo, who happens to also, well, has some complications with the Metarex, and then also gets unfortunately killed off, but is the one that tags along with Sonic and his friends the entire time. And also happens to grow a close relationship with Tails. Because apparently it seemed like when me and my brother watched it, from what we remember, it seemed like Tails had something like a special feeling towards Cosmo. And there also were times where apparently when Sonic got angry, he turned into a darker version of Sonic. Like, for whatever reason, he just ends up getting dark energy. Like, I guess if he had the Chaos Emeralds, he'd obviously become Super Sonic, which is pretty much his Super Saiyan form. And also the Dark Sonic, which I don't remember what originally caused it. But from what I remember, it just randomly came out of nowhere and suddenly he was able to do it. And Shadow also returns in this saga too. Because Shadow hasn't really been seen since his own saga. And during that saga, he also told Chris about his friend. Like a friend that he used to know but is no longer around because she actually got killed off in both Shadow's game and in Sonic X as well. At least either, but if it was the English dub, they're probably gonna say captured. That's usually the excuse they try to get away with in the English dub for anything 4Kids made. And unfortunately, I forgot how the series completely ended with Matter X, but I'm pretty sure Sonic won. But before Matter X, there were also some comic relief characters, or at least some others that were around that Sonic also met with Chris, and that was also Chris's grandfather as well. I also forgot to mention that in the Matter X saga, Chris actually did come back, but apparently it took place about 10 years or so after Sonic X, or at least after the previous season, and Chris was, from what I remember, a scientist, and he also created a portal that allowed him to get back to Sonic's world so he can meet up with him again. And when he did, he somehow turned back into a child. He turned back into the version of Chris that most people know of from seasons 1, 2, and 3, pretty much the Chaos and Matter X sagas. Not Matter X, Shadow. This is the Matter X saga now. Jesus Christ. And some of the characters were pretty much almost to their how they were stereotyped too. Knuckles is pretty much protecting the Master Emerald, which is a giant Chaos Emerald. Amy is still in love with Sonic and chasing him wherever they go, especially in one episode. They also were supposed to have a date, but Sonic was late and didn't really come till near the end. Unfortunately for Amy, she never really got around with him. In fact, in the game, Sonic was always trying to get away from Amy. That was until probably about Sonic Unleashed, because he wasn't really trying to get away from her before. But back in like some of the older ones, like Sonic CD, which was actually Amy's first appearance, he did try to get away from her. Now, finally, if you ask me, this series actually was good, but it wasn't the best. Like, maybe not the best Sonic series, but it is one of my favorite ones. And also my introduction to Sonic. Now, how can I put this? They also kind of aired the series too much. When 4Kids still had the series, and when Saban also got it after 4Kids went bankrupt. I'll explain that in a few minutes, but Sonic X was actually aired a little bit too much. It was actually the one show that was aired a lot, where it was aired a lot on 4Kids TV, and when it got to the CW, when they made it into CW 4Kids, well, it was aired non-stop. It would literally air probably around 8 o'clock and 8:30, and then for whatever reason, just come back about an hour later at 9:30, even though there were already 2 episodes of it. And a show like maybe Dinosaur King would be on. Like either a Dinosaur King or maybe Yu-Gi-Oh! Even though Yu-Gi-Oh! At that time came out in around 11 o'clock. Which would also be when the block would always go off. That was also when it was Vortex as well, because when it became Vortex, that was when 4Kids got bankrupt, and I'll actually explain how it happened. Now, getting back to apparently, even though I already mentioned Yu-Gi-Oh! And Shaman King in both parts 1 and this one, it actually had something to do with those, and that was the fact that 4Kids actually was working with Funimation and made like some DVDs for an uncut dub of both Yu-Gi-Oh! And Shaman King. And the original Japanese creators, which would also be not only the people who made the mangas, but also there would also be the people who made the show, and then also the channel that aired them in Japan, which was TV Tokyo, and the company that owned Shaman King Records. But Yu-Gi-Oh! Was the only one that got into this problem, and this was also a problem with their company that also made the card game Upper Deck, also got into a lawsuit. But the main part of the lawsuit, 4Kids got into it, and the Yu-Gi-Oh! Franchise, they got into Chapter 11 bankruptcy and were sued for $5 million. They had to pay up and also had to lose all of their licenses. And at this time, Pokemon was already sold off to the Pokemon Company after Season 8. And Yu-Gi-Oh! Became their only show that was really that popular other than Sonic X. Those two were pretty much their cash cows. They were their most popular, but they also, since they lost Pokemon, which was their most popular, they had to make Yu-Gi-Oh! And Sonic X into cash cows. Milk them until they were literally dry. And unfortunately, got stale a little. So now, after that, Yu-Gi-Oh! Then lost the rights to Yu-Gi-Oh! Later on gone to Konami, which were the people who made the card game and also are the people who make Metal Gear Solid and Castlevania. They had the rights to make the anime, or at least the English dubs for the anime, by making up a company that was built off of a few members from 4Kids, like when they were still around. And then 4Kids closed their doors, and then later became a company known as 4 Licensing Corporation. They're still around, but not many good things have been said. And what I mean by that is that apparently they did have they did make something for sports, and that was apparently something known as Isoblocks, but Isoblocks, as far as I'm concerned, from what I remember, didn't do too well. And then later on, apparently 4Kids got into another lawsuit of Chapter 11 bankruptcy, it seems. At least that's what's going on with 4Kids now. So, yeah, unfortunately, 4Kids were almost at the top of the world, or at least at first, were unknown, and also made a show known as I believe MA Masters, I believe is what it was called. At least that's when they started, but then it got canceled because of low ratings. Then later on got to Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! And then expanded their entire library with TMNT, Shaman King, Mew Power, Dinosaur King, then Sonic X, and even the other anime that shall not be named for their English dub. But I will play the tune for the song. But so ends the legacy of 4Kids Entertainment. They were good, but we all kind of lost them. To put it straight, they were at the top, but then later they let it go to their heads, and then they just fell off from the face of the earth, became something new, and then got into the same crap that they got into that made them get bankrupt in the first place. So I guess now this is Neos Gamer signing off. And then wait! What? You forgot something. What? Kirby! Kirby? Yes, Kirby, right back at you! Oh. Kirby, right back at you. Yeah, that's right. You and my brother did mention that, didn't you, Charlie? Yes. Kirby, right back at you. Unfortunately, I didn't see Kirby right back at you much yet, though. Oh. Well, are you gonna watch it soon? Yes, I will, and then maybe I'll review it as episode 3. Will that make you happier, your buddy? Sure. But by the way, you might want to tell that 4Kids guy in the jumpsuit, or at least not a jumpsuit, that looks like a cow. He's dressed as a cowboy now. You might want to tell him to stop looking at me crazily. Can you please? He looks like he's about to kill me. Okay, fine. I'll take care of him. Stay back, Charlie.
Shit! Shit indeed. Still.